The morning sun filtered through the tall, narrow windows of the old courthouse, casting warm streaks across the polished wooden floors. Outside, the town stirred to life. Shutters creaked, tires rolled on pavement, and conversations about the day's unusual courtroom event buzzed along the streets. Today was not a typical day in the sleepy town of. People had gathered not to hear a business dispute or a traffic violation, but to witness something almost unheard of. A 3-year-old girl was about to testify in court. That alone was enough to draw a crowd, but the story behind it had captivated the entire community. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was a mixture of curiosity, tension, and disbelief. The main courtroom, usually reserved for routine cases, had been transformed into a stage for an unprecedented event. Rows of benches were filled with spectators, some journalists, some concerned citizens, and many curious townspeople who had heard whispers of the incident through social media. Cameras clicked, lights flickered, and a low murmur of speculation filled the room. At the front, a judge, gray-haired and seasoned with decades of courtroom experience, sat behind his elevated bench, scanning the room with keen eyes. He had seen countless trials, but nothing like this. Today, a toddler was expected to speak directly about an encounter with a police dog that had stirred a wave of controversy. The young girl, Lily, sat quietly in the front row, her small hand clutched tightly by her mother, Sarah. Lily was a bright-eyed child, with curly hair that tumbled over her forehead, and an expression that was a mixture of curiosity and nervous anticipation. She did not fully understand the gravity of the courtroom or the weight her words might carry, but she understood that something important was about to happen. Her mother knelt beside her, whispering softly to reassure her, while her father stood behind them, arms crossed, trying to appear calm despite the storm of anxiety brewing in his chest. Lily's parents had debated endlessly over whether she should testify. She was only 3, barely able to form full sentences, yet her family believed her perspective was crucial. The incident involved a police dog that had lunged at Lily during a routine patrol outside their home. Although she had not been injured, the encounter left her terrified, and the family was convinced that adult accounts alone could not fully convey what had occurred. It was Lily's voice, unfiltered and innocent, that could bring the truth to light. Lawyers on both sides prepared meticulously, some skeptical, others cautiously optimistic. The prosecution team had built their case around the dog's aggressive behavior, while the defense emphasized proper police procedure and the unpredictable nature of working animals. Now, everything hinged on the tiny voice of a toddler. The lead prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Karen Mitchell, whispered with her assistant, reviewing notes that were barely legible next to doodles Lily had made of dogs and houses. Across the room, the defense attorney, a stoic man named Thomas, adjusted his tie, concerned that the child's innocence might sway the jury in ways facts and regulations never could. As the judge called the court to order, a hush fell over the room. The usual shuffling of papers and murmured side conversations ceased, replaced by an expectant silence that seemed to stretch for minutes. The air felt heavy, charged with the anticipation of something extraordinary. Even the officers present appeared tense, knowing that a child's testimony could drastically alter public perception of the department. One young officer shifted nervously, glancing at the judge and then down at his polished boots, while another tried to maintain a stoic expression, failing to mask the flicker of concern in his eyes. Lily's small hand trembled slightly in her mother's grip as they were called forward. She had been coached gently, told to just tell the truth in her own words, but the enormity of the situation was beginning to sink in. The courtroom, usually a space for adults to debate, argue, and deliver evidence, was now awaiting the perspective of a child who had experienced fear in a way that no report or testimony could replicate. Journalists leaned forward, some holding pens poised to capture her words verbatim, while camera operators their equipment to record every detail. The story that had brought them here was both simple and extraordinary. 2 weeks prior, Lily had been playing in her front yard under the watchful eyes of her mother when the police dog, part of a routine patrol, approached unexpectedly. The dog's sudden appearance and loud barking had frightened her, and despite the officer's attempts to control the animal, the encounter escalated briefly before being resolved. No one was physically harmed, yet the incident had ignited a firestorm of debate across the town. Parents worried for their children, while the police department defended its protocols. The conversation spilled online, with social media posts, video clips, and opinion threads dissecting every detail. Lily's account had become the missing piece, the one element that could finally clarify what had happened. As she stepped onto the platform, the courtroom seemed to hold its collective breath. Lily's mother knelt briefly, whispering encouragement, smoothing her daughter's curls and smiling reassuringly. "You're very brave, Lily," she said softly. Lily nodded, her wide eyes scanning the room full of adults, all of whom towered over her like giants. She did not fully comprehend why they were all staring at her, but she understood that she needed to talk about the dog, about what had frightened her, and about the moment she had felt scared. The judge leaned forward slightly, a gesture meant to put her at ease. "Take your time, young lady," he said kindly. "Just tell us what happened." His tone was gentle, devoid of intimidation, yet carried a weight that even a child could sense. Lily took a deep breath, her small chest rising and falling rapidly, and looked directly at the officer who had handled the dog. There was no malice in her gaze, only a raw, unfiltered truth. The courtroom remained silent, every pair of eyes fixed on the tiny figure. Spectators shifted uneasily, realizing that the dynamics of this trial were about to change. This was not a typical legal proceeding. It was an intersection of innocence and authority, of childhood experience versus procedural law. Everyone present felt it, an unspoken tension that clung to the air, heavy and electric. Outside the courtroom, news crews reported on the unfolding scene live, describing a toddler poised to speak about an encounter that had captivated the town. The footage of Lily stepping forward circulated almost immediately online, sparking comments of admiration, astonishment, and curiosity from people far beyond the borders of. Headlines quickly appeared. "Toddler takes stand in police dog incident," and 3-year-old's testimony stuns courtroom. In homes, offices, and viewers leaned in, captivated by the idea that a child so young could carry the weight of truth in such a public arena. As Lily prepared to speak, the lawyers exchanged quick, tense glances. The prosecutor's notes were momentarily forgotten, replaced by a realization. This child might reveal details that no adult witness had observed or remembered. Even the seasoned judge, accustomed to weighing complex evidence, felt a rare moment of vulnerability. Here was a human truth, unpolished and raw, that could not be summarized in charts, reports, or official statements. It was simple yet powerful, a perspective only a child could offer. For Lily, the world felt enormous and intimidating. Every person in the room seemed larger than life, every gaze intense and focused. But beneath the anxiety, there was a spark of determination. She had lived through the fear of that day, and now she had a chance to explain it in her own words. No one could argue with her feelings, and no adult narrative could overshadow her perspective. For the first time, the courtroom was about to see the event exactly as she had experienced it, frightening, confusing, and real. The moment stretched, elongated by anticipation. The subtle creak of the wooden floorboards, the soft rustle of papers, even the quiet breathing of those watching, all combined to create a scene charged with expectation. And then, finally, Lily opened her mouth, ready to speak the words that would captivate an entire courtroom, spark community debate, and leave an indelible mark on everyone who witnessed it. This was more than a courtroom. This was a stage, a test of courage, a moment where innocence met authority, and a tiny voice threatened to upend the assumptions of adults. It was the beginning of a story no one would forget, a story about truth, bravery, and the extraordinary power of even the smallest among us. The events leading to the courtroom drama were, in retrospect, deceptively ordinary, until they spiraled into something that would captivate the entire town. 2 weeks prior, the morning had begun like any other for Lily and her family. The sun had just risen over the quiet suburban neighborhood, casting soft gold light across manicured lawns. Birds chirped, sprinklers hissed, and the scent of freshly baked bread drifted from the kitchen where Sarah, Lily's mother, was preparing breakfast. Lily, full of energy and curiosity, had run out to the front yard, her favorite spot for play, clutching her small stuffed rabbit as she imagined herself on grand adventures. It was a peaceful moment, the kind that mothers treasure and police officers might overlook. Yet, it was during this serene playtime that a patrol car turned onto their street, seemingly routine, its tires crunching softly against the asphalt. Inside the vehicle, Officer Daniels guided the police dog, Rex, a highly trained German shepherd, through a familiar neighborhood patrol route. Rex was a star in the local K-9 unit, recognized for his agility and keen instincts. To the officers, the patrol was standard procedure, just another morning ensuring the town remained safe. But for Lily, the world was about to tilt. As Rex approached the edge of the yard, his ears pricked and his posture stiffened. He was responding to signals invisible to human eyes, instincts honed through months of rigorous training. Lily, seeing the imposing figure of the dog, froze mid-step. Her small heart raced, adrenaline coursing through her tiny body. She did not fully understand why the dog was there, only that it looked large, loud, and frightening. Her mother's voice called out, "Lily, stay calm." But the dog's sudden bark drowned out the gentle tone. The sound was sharp, commanding, and terrifying to a 3-year-old. The scene escalated quickly. Rex lunged forward, as trained to react to perceived threats or commands from his handler. Sarah screamed, rushing toward her daughter, her voice trembling with fear. Lily instinctively took a step back, clutching her rabbit tightly to her chest. In the chaos, the officer struggled to maintain control, pulling on the leash with firm commands. The dog's barking echoed through the street, drawing the attention of neighbors who peeked out of windows, their curiosity turning to alarm. No one expected the confrontation to unfold in such a dramatic and emotionally charged manner. For Lily, the moment was terrifying. Her tiny legs wobbled as she tried to retreat, but the dog's sudden movements made it hard to gauge how close it really was. Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, to hide, to escape the large, barking animal. Her mother's arms reached for her, attempting to shield her from the noise, the movement, the overwhelming size of the dog. Meanwhile, the officer's commands became more urgent, the tension escalating as the dog continued to lunge and bark, performing the exact behaviors it had been trained to exhibit under pressure. Though no physical injuries occurred, the emotional impact on Lily was profound. Her chest heaved with rapid breaths, tears streaking down her cheeks, and her small hands trembled as she tried to explain to her mother what had happened. "It barked loud. It ran fast," she repeated, her words simple but filled with genuine terror. Sarah knelt beside her, holding her tight, trying to convey calm, yet inside, she too felt a wave of fear and helplessness. How could such a small, innocent creature like Lily be so affected by something meant to protect the community? Neighbors began to emerge, drawn by the commotion, and the incident quickly drew attention beyond the immediate family. Some expressed outrage at what they perceived as reckless police behavior, while others defended the officers, citing the unpredictability of working animals and the challenges of maintaining public safety. Phones were raised, videos recorded, and social media posts began to circulate almost instantly. Within hours, the quiet neighborhood had become a hotspot of discussion, debate, and division. The incident had tapped into broader concerns about community safety, police accountability, and the treatment of children in unexpected situations. Lily's parents were caught between defending the innocence of their child and managing the legal implications of the encounter. Sarah called the police department immediately after the incident to report what had happened and request a formal review. Meanwhile, Thomas, Lily's father, documented every detail he could remember, from the dog's exact movements to Lily's frightened reactions, creating a record he hoped would be useful in ensuring her voice was heard. The family understood that, while no one had been physically harmed, the psychological impact on a child could not be dismissed. The news of the incident spread rapidly. Local news outlets picked up the story within hours, highlighting the unusual nature of the case, a toddler frightened by a trained police dog, and framing it as a question of public safety and procedure. Social media amplified the story, with posts garnering thousands of likes, shares, and comments. Some community members praised the officers for following protocol, while others questioned whether more safeguards should be in place for interactions between police dogs and children. The narrative quickly polarized opinions, creating tension that extended far beyond the immediate neighborhood. As discussions grew, it became clear that Lily's account would be central to understanding the incident. Unlike adult witnesses, who might offer biased or procedural interpretations, Lily could provide a pure, unfiltered perspective of what had actually transpired. Her description of the dog's barking, the sudden movements, and the fear she experienced could clarify critical details that adult recollections might overlook. Her parents, recognizing the importance of her testimony, began carefully preparing her for the possibility of speaking in court, even though she was only 3. The legal implications of the incident became increasingly apparent. Police procedures were scrutinized, prompting questions about training, safety protocols, and the responsibilities of officers when patrolling residential neighborhoods. Experts were consulted, reports filed, and meetings held behind closed doors, all in an effort to prevent a similar situation in the future. Yet for the family, the matter was intensely personal. They wanted acknowledgement of Lily's fear, recognition of the potential risk to children, and assurances that no other family would face the same trauma. Meanwhile, the community's reaction continued to escalate. Town meetings were called, debates held at local, and letters to the editor flooded newspapers. Some parents spoke about their own children, recalling moments when they had feared authority figures or large animals. Others defended the police, emphasizing the challenges of maintaining safety in a complex world. Lily's story, though simple, became a lens through which the entire town examined the balance between protection and risk, authority and innocence. For Lily, the experience left a mark that went beyond fear. It was the first time she had confronted a situation that felt overwhelming and threatening, and her reactions were instinctual, honest, and immediate. Her parents marveled at her ability to articulate, even in the simplest terms, what she had felt. "It was scary. I ran. I cried," she told them repeatedly, her small voice trembling but steady. These words, while straightforward, contained a depth of emotion and clarity that adults often struggled to convey in more formal statements. It was this clarity, coupled with her innocence, that ultimately prompted the decision to bring her testimony into the courtroom. Legal advisors discussed at length whether a 3-year-old could provide meaningful testimony, but the family argued persuasively that Lily's perspective was unique and crucial. The case was scheduled for a hearing, with preparations to ensure the child would be comfortable and supported while providing her account. Judges, lawyers, and court staff alike recognized the unusual nature of the proceeding, anticipating a scenario that would challenge traditional courtroom dynamics and capture public attention in unprecedented ways. By the time the court date arrived, the incident had become a defining moment in the town's collective consciousness. What began as a routine patrol and a simple moment of play in a front yard had escalated into a public conversation about fear, safety, and the power of a child's perspective. Community members debated endlessly, some expressing outrage, others admiration for the family's courage. The story, simple in its events yet profound in its implications, had transformed Lily from an ordinary toddler into a symbol of honesty, bravery, and the unfiltered truth that only a child can provide. And so, when Lily finally stepped into the courtroom, She carried with her not just the memory of the incident, but the weight of the town's attention and the promise of a story that could change the course of public discourse. The police-dog encounter had shaken more than one household. It had ignited reflection, discussion, and awareness on a scale that no one had anticipated. For the first time, adults were beginning to see the world through the eyes of a child, recognizing that courage and truth do not depend on age or stature. They depend on the willingness to speak, even when the world seems frighteningly large. In retrospect, that day in the yard was more than an incident. It was the beginning of a journey, one that would challenge assumptions, test emotions, and ultimately bring a community together in unexpected ways. Lily's fear, so raw and immediate, became a catalyst for understanding. Her parents' devotion, so steadfast and protective, became a testament to family resilience. And the police officer's actions, scrutinized and analyzed, became part of a broader conversation about responsibility, empathy, and accountability. From the quiet streets to the buzzing courtroom, the story of a 3-year-old girl and a police dog had captured hearts, minds, and the attention of a nation. The incident, simple yet profound, set the stage for what was about to unfold in court. A rare moment where innocence, fear, and truth collided, promising revelations that no one, lawyers, officers, or spectators, could have anticipated. It was a story that began with a bark, a frightened child, and a backyard encounter, but it would echo far beyond that morning, changing the way people thought about courage, justice, and the voice of even the youngest among us. The days leading up to the court hearing were a flurry of anticipation, careful planning, and subtle anxiety. For Lily's parents, every detail mattered: how she would enter the courtroom, where she would sit, how she would respond to questions. They knew that their daughter, though small and innocent, carried a perspective no adult witness could replicate. And they also knew that even minor stress could overwhelm her, so they approached preparation with a delicate balance of seriousness and gentleness. Sarah, Lily's mother, spent hours talking to her daughter in soft, reassuring tones. "Lily," she said one morning as sunlight poured through the kitchen window, "you are going to tell the truth about what happened. Just tell everyone what you saw and what you felt." She explained the roles of the judge, the lawyers, and the officer, though in terms a 3-year-old could grasp. "The man in the black robe is going to listen," she said, pointing to a stack of court photos. "He wants to know your story." Lily nodded solemnly, clutching her stuffed rabbit close, her blue eyes wide and curious, yet reflecting a small measure of understanding. Thomas, Lily's father, focused on practical preparations. He measured the courtroom step by step, ensuring that Lily would be able to reach the stand without fear. He rehearsed her entry and exit routes, tested the microphone at her height, and arranged seating to minimize distraction. He wanted her to feel secure and supported, to know that she was never alone. Each time they reviewed the steps, he made it feel like a game. "We walk up here, say hello, tell the story, and then we go back to mommy." "Easy, right?" Lily giggled at the simplicity, though a tiny quiver betrayed the nervousness she felt. Legal advisors debated extensively about the best way to handle her testimony. Some were skeptical. How could a toddler provide anything meaningful? But the family and their attorneys argued persuasively that Lily's voice, pure and unfiltered, was essential. Experts in child psychology were consulted to ensure the process would be gentle and stress-free. They provided tips: use simple language, avoid leading questions, allow her to describe emotions in her own words, and never rush her. The courtroom team adjusted seating, lighting, and microphones accordingly, recognizing the unusual challenge of accommodating a child witness of such a young age. Meanwhile, word of the impending testimony spread throughout the town. Local newspapers published stories about the young girl preparing to testify, and social media buzzed with speculation. Parents debated whether they would bring their own children to witness the event, while others questioned the necessity of a toddler speaking in court. Yet for the majority, there was a sense of awe. Could a 3-year-old really influence the outcome of a legal case? Could the smallest voice in the room carry the weight of truth? These questions hung over the town like a cloud of anticipation. The family created a quiet space at home for Lily to practice. They set up toy courtrooms with stuffed animals as jury members, using soft, playful language to guide her. Rex, the police dog involved in the incident, was represented by a large stuffed dog that Lily could point to while recounting events. The sessions were lighthearted, yet they provided a foundation for her ability to recall details. "He barked. He ran fast," she would declare, giggling and pointing at the toy dog. Sarah and Thomas would nod, encouraging her, but always careful not to pressure or overdirect her words. In addition to rehearsals, Sarah and Thomas worked on emotional resilience. They explained to Lily that it was okay to feel scared, nervous, or even confused, and that telling the truth did mean she had to be perfect. "Sometimes people ask lots of questions," Thomas said gently, kneeling to meet her gaze. "You can take a deep breath and just tell them how you felt." These lessons, though small, were monumental in helping Lily prepare for the intensity of a real courtroom, an environment filled with unfamiliar adults, cameras, and a formal structure that could easily overwhelm any child. As the court date approached, the family noticed subtle changes in Lily. She became more aware of her surroundings, pointing out details in the neighborhood she had never noticed before. She talked about the dog's size, the bark's loudness, and the way the officer moved. Each observation, though simple, added clarity to the narrative. Sarah documented these remarks, both to reassure themselves and to ensure the court would have an accurate understanding of Lily's perception. Even small details like the angle of the sidewalk or the height of the fence were noted, as they could help contextualize her account. Community members, too, became involved in preparation, albeit indirectly. Friends offered advice, neighbors shared stories of children's responses to similar situations, and local teachers discussed methods to help young children communicate effectively. Some families even brought their own children to small practice sessions to simulate public speaking, though Lily was always shielded from pressure. The town's involvement, while unofficial, added a layer of collective support and anticipation. Everyone seemed to understand that this was more than a legal proceeding. It was a moment where innocence and truth might challenge authority and perception. The night before the court hearing, Lily could barely sleep. She tossed and turned in her small bed, hugging her rabbit tightly. Dreams of barking dogs and loud noises mingled with her thoughts of the courtroom. Sarah sat beside her, stroking her hair, whispering reassurance. "Tomorrow, you'll tell everyone what happened. You'll be brave just like you always are." Thomas stood by the doorway, silently observing, feeling a mixture of pride, fear, and hope. The entire household seemed suspended in a delicate balance, aware that the next day could change the course of their lives. On the morning of the court appearance, the family prepared slowly and deliberately. Breakfast was light, conversations gentle. Sarah reminded Lily to breathe, to listen carefully, and to speak her own words. Thomas checked the route to the courthouse, ensuring there were no distractions or hazards along the way. They dressed her in a simple but neat outfit, one that would allow her comfort and ease of movement. Every small decision, from socks to, was considered, a reflection of the family's meticulous care in protecting their daughter while preparing her for an extraordinary task. Upon arrival at the courthouse, the building felt imposing. Its tall stone and heavy oak doors loomed over them, but Lily held her parents' hands tightly, her small fingers weaving through theirs. The interior smelled of polished wood and faint ink, a scent that immediately grounded the family in the reality of the proceedings. They passed through security, their presence attracting curious glances from spectators and journalists alike. Cameras clicked, flashes popped, and whispers followed them down the hall. The tension was palpable, yet the family focused on the task at hand, helping Lily feel safe, supported, and prepared to speak her truth. Once inside the courtroom, the judge's chambers were calm and controlled, a stark contrast to the buzzing crowd outside. Lily took a seat on a specially arranged chair, slightly elevated so she could see the judge and the lawyers clearly. The prosecutor and defense attorney approached carefully, introducing themselves in gentle, non-threatening tones. "Hello, Lily," the prosecutor said softly, kneeling to meet her gaze. We just want to hear your story. You don't have to worry about anything else." The defense attorney nodded in agreement. His expression softened from his usual stern demeanor. The emphasis on reassurance over intimidation was deliberate and critical. The stage was now set. Lily had spent weeks preparing, learning to articulate her thoughts, manage her emotions, and understand the roles of the people around her. Every detail, every moment of practice had been designed to allow her voice to shine unfiltered. And now, as she sat quietly, her parents beside her, the courtroom seemed to pause in anticipation. The next step, her moment on the stand, was about to unfold. The tension in the room was thick, but it was tempered by an unmistakable sense of awe. A 3-year-old was about to speak, and everyone present understood that her words could carry profound weight. In this delicate balance of nerves, anticipation, and preparation, Lily embodied both vulnerability and strength. Her innocence, often underestimated, was now the most potent element of the upcoming proceedings. For her parents, the preparation process had been as much about teaching courage as it was about legal readiness. For the lawyers and the judge, it was about understanding how truth could emerge from an unexpected source. And for the community, it was about witnessing a moment that challenged conventional perceptions of age, authority, and voice. As the court finally called for the session to begin, Lily took a deep breath, the lessons from her parents and legal advisors guiding her tiny frame. Her hand clutched her rabbit with quiet determination, and she rose from her chair, walking toward the stand with careful, measured steps. Every eye in the courtroom followed her, and a silence deeper than any courtroom had ever known enveloped the space. It was a moment poised between anticipation and revelation, a moment where innocence met responsibility, and the smallest voice promised to speak the largest truth. The courtroom fell into an unusual hush as the small girl approached the witness stand. It was a silence heavy with anticipation, curiosity, and disbelief. At 3 years old, Lily was perhaps the youngest person ever to testify in the town's history, and the air was thick with tension as all eyes followed her tiny frame. Her parents flanked her, their hands still gently holding hers, providing a bridge of comfort between the unfamiliarity of the courtroom and the safe haven of home. Lily's stuffed rabbit remained clutched under her arm, a small anchor in a sea of overwhelming adults and looming authority. The judge, a man with decades of experience navigating the complexities of law, leaned forward slightly on his bench, a gesture meant to be both encouraging and non-intimidating. "Good morning, Lily," he said softly, his voice calm and warm. "You can tell us everything you remember about what happened. Just speak in your own words." Though he had presided over countless cases, this moment was unlike any he had seen before. The seriousness of the courtroom contrasted sharply with the delicate innocence of the witness, and yet he understood that the truth often emerges in the most unexpected forms. Lily stepped up onto the small platform prepared for her height, carefully placing one foot in front of the other. She looked out over the room, her wide eyes taking in the rows of spectators, the camera flashes, the solemn faces of lawyers and officers. It was intimidating, but she drew courage from her parents' presence and from the countless hours of gentle preparation at home. Her voice, when it came, was soft but steady. "The dog barked really loud," she said, pointing toward a photograph displayed on the evidence board that depicted Rex, the police dog, mid-stride. Her small hand trembled slightly, but her words were precise. The prosecutor, Corinne Mitchell, leaned forward with a mixture of admiration and surprise. She had expected a toddler to struggle, perhaps babble, or even refuse to speak, but Lily's clarity and determination were striking. "Can you tell us what the dog did next, Lily?" she asked, keeping her tone gentle as though speaking to any frightened child. Lily nodded solemnly. "It ran fast. I tried to hide behind Mommy." Her words were simple, but the description carried weight. The courtroom could feel the fear she had experienced, a raw and unfiltered emotion that no adult witness could replicate. Across the room, Officer Daniels shifted uneasily. He had expected a narrative that would focus on procedural correctness, but instead, he was confronted with the human impact of his K-9 partner's actions. The officers in the room glanced at one another, the tension in their posture betraying their discomfort. Even the defense attorney, Thomas, known for his calm, controlled demeanor, appeared caught off guard by the honesty and clarity of the child's recounting. It was a reminder that truth often arrives unpolished, yet more powerful for its simplicity. Lily continued, her small voice growing steadier with each sentence. The dog barked loud, jumped, I was scared. She pointed again to the picture, emphasizing each motion and sound she remembered. Her parents exchanged glances, pride and worry mingling in equal measure. This was everything they had hoped for, not a rehearsed performance, but an honest account of the fear and chaos of that day. The courtroom seemed to lean in collectively, adults suddenly aware that a toddler's perspective could hold more clarity than their own adult interpretations. The judge nodded encouragingly. You're doing very well, Lily, he said. Can you tell us how you felt when the dog barked and ran toward you? This was a crucial moment, one that allowed her to convey not just the events themselves, but the emotional truth behind them. Lily hesitated for a fraction of a second, considering the question carefully. Then, in a voice tinged with vulnerability, she said, I was scared, really scared. Her small body trembled slightly as she admitted her fear, and a collective murmur ran through the spectators. It was a word simple in form, yet monumental in impact. The defense attorney approached with care. Lily, he said gently, do you remember what the officer said when the dog barked? Lily nodded again, her memory clear despite her young age. He said, stay there, Rex. She spoke slowly, her words deliberate, conveying both the sequence of events and her perception of them. This detail, seemingly minor, would later prove essential in reconstructing the encounter, highlighting the exact timing of commands and reactions. The courtroom, usually focused on procedure, now became an immersive space of lived experience through the eyes of a child. As Lily spoke, the prosecutor allowed her to continue without interruption, careful to let her narrative flow naturally. I ran to Mommy and the dog ran fast after me, she said, her hands gesturing slightly, emphasizing the speed and direction of the dog. Her voice, though soft, carried a weight that resonated throughout the room. Each word painted a vivid picture. A small girl, frightened and vulnerable, confronted by a large, powerful animal. Spectators leaned forward, unable to turn away from the scene unfolding in real time. The emotional gravity of the moment became apparent as Lily described the scene in her own words. I cried, she admitted, and I hid my face. Her confession was met with quiet acknowledgement, a subtle nod from the judge, a shift in posture from the lawyers, a ripple of empathy across the spectators. This was not a dramatized account. It was the authentic experience of a child, uncolored by adult biases or legal strategy. The raw honesty of her recollection had a magnetic effect, compelling everyone in the room to reconsider the incident from a perspective they had never fully understood. Lily's testimony also revealed details that had gone unnoticed in prior reports. The dog barked near the fence, and I tripped over a stone, she said, pointing with a small finger to indicate the path she had taken. This simple observation highlighted potential hazards in the yard and offered critical insight into her movements during the encounter. The legal teams took note, scribbling down every word, aware that even the smallest detail could affect procedural evaluation and liability considerations. Her innocence, paradoxically, provided clarity that adults had struggled to articulate. The judge, recognizing the significance of her words, allowed her to describe her emotions further. How did it feel when the dog barked so loud? He asked softly. Lily took a deep breath, a child's pause that carried remarkable weight. It felt big, loud. I wanted to hide, she said. Her articulation of the sensory and emotional aspects of the encounter was striking, capturing the intangible experience of fear and vulnerability. The courtroom responded unconsciously, a shared sense of empathy rippling through every adult present. Observers in the gallery were visibly moved. Some parents whispered to each other, recalling moments when their own children had been frightened. Others, familiar with the police department, assumptions about protocol and risk. Journalists leaned closer, recording every syllable, aware that these words would resonate far beyond the courthouse walls. The emotional impact of Lily's testimony was undeniable, transforming what could have been a procedural recounting into a human story of fear, courage, and perspective. Lily's story also began to reshape the narrative around the officer's actions. The officer tried to stop the dog, she continued, but it ran too fast. I couldn't run fast enough. Her observation was blunt, honest, and crucial, illustrating the limitations of control even in highly trained situations. The adults in the room, lawyers, judges, officers, realized that this account could not be dismissed as inconsequential. It was a moment of clarity, a reminder that child witnesses, even at an extraordinary young age, could reveal truths that meticulous reports and adult recollections might miss. The prosecutor gently guided her to continue, allowing Lily to describe the resolution of the encounter. Then Mommy picked me up. The dog stopped. Her words were simple, yet they provided the closure necessary to understand the sequence of events fully. The courtroom exhaled collectively, as if holding its breath had been part of the proceedings. Even the officers present seemed to relax slightly, acknowledging that the event, while distressing, had been resolved without physical harm, yet its emotional resonance remained. Lily's parents exchanged a glance of quiet relief, their hearts swelling with pride. Their daughter, small and vulnerable, had faced a room full of authority figures and strangers, and had spoken her truth with remarkable clarity. They understood that her words, though innocent, were powerful and transformative. It was a lesson in courage, a demonstration of resilience, and a reminder that honesty, even from the youngest among us, could carry profound weight. The defense attorney asked one final question, carefully phrased to avoid leading her. "Did anything else happen that made you feel scared?" Lily paused briefly, then replied, "No. The dog stopped and I hugged Mommy." The simplicity of her statement, the juxtaposition of fear and comfort, resonated throughout the courtroom. It reminded everyone that the incident, while serious, was ultimately an experience framed by protection, care, and the instinct to seek safety. By the time Lily returned to her parents' side, the courtroom remained silent for a heartbeat longer than usual. She had spoken honestly, clearly, and without prompting, a feat remarkable for someone of her age. Every adult present, from lawyers to officers, journalists to spectators, had been impacted. The testimony had provided an unfiltered window into the events that had transpired, revealing not only the facts but the emotions, perceptions, and reactions that shaped the encounter. It was a moment that would be remembered long after the trial concluded. A tiny girl, no older than 3, had commanded the attention of an entire courtroom, reshaping assumptions and perceptions through the power of her own words. Her testimony demonstrated the unique perspective a child brings, the ability to cut through procedural language and focus on the human truth of an event. In that instant, Lily was no longer just a witness. She was the voice of clarity, honesty, and courage in a room accustomed to complexity and debate. As she sat back down, still clutching her rabbit, a wave of admiration swept through the spectators. Journalists whispered into microphones, observers nodded quietly, and even the judge allowed a faint, approving smile to cross his face. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary, the unfiltered testimony of a child who had experienced fear and conveyed it with astonishing clarity. And though the case was far from over, one fact was indisputable: Lily's voice had changed everything. The courtroom was silent for a moment longer than usual after Lily's small footsteps carried her back to her parents' side. Then, almost imperceptibly at first, reactions began to ripple through the room. A gasped whisper here, a soft murmur there, until it seemed as if the very walls were vibrating with collective astonishment. No one had anticipated the profound impact of a 3-year-old's words, yet every adult present found themselves caught between disbelief and admiration. The simplicity of her testimony, so clear, so unembellished, so innocent, had transformed a procedural hearing into an emotional reckoning. Some spectators covered their mouths in shock, eyes wide as if afraid to break the spell. Parents glanced at one another, silently comparing Lily's courage with the behavior of their own children in far less consequential situations. Teachers, sitting quietly in the back rows, whispered about the clarity of her narrative and the raw honesty that adults often struggled to achieve even after decades of experience. Everyone in that room felt the gravity of what had just occurred, not just a recounting of events, but a genuine, heartfelt representation of fear, bravery, and the human experience. The judge, seasoned and stoic, allowed himself a faint smile. He adjusted his glasses, leaning back slightly, and considered the unusual tableau before him. In all his years, he had presided over cases involving adult witnesses, child witnesses, and expert testimony, but never had he encountered a situation where a toddler could articulate a story with such precision and emotional depth. Her words had illuminated not only the sequence of events, but also the fear and vulnerability she had experienced. It was a reminder that truth often transcends formalities, emerging in its form from the most unexpected sources. Lawyers, too, were caught off guard. The prosecutor, Corinne Mitchell, sat with a rare expression of awe, scribbling rapid notes while silently acknowledging the significance of each detail Lily had provided. Even small statements about the dog's movements, her own attempts to escape, and her emotional responses could influence the court's understanding of the incident in ways that adult witnesses had failed to convey. The defense attorney, Thomas, maintained his professional composure, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. The child's testimony, though honest and unassuming, had introduced variables that procedural reports had overlooked. Officer Daniels, present during the incident, remained seated rigidly in the courtroom, his body tense and shoulders tight. He had prepared for testimony that emphasized training protocols, commands given, and procedural adherence, but Lily's narrative had reframed the situation entirely. Now, he was confronted with the human impact of the encounter, the fear she felt, the immediacy of her reactions, and the clarity with which she perceived the events. The officers exchanged glances, a subtle acknowledgement that this case, previously seen as routine, had grown into a profound examination of the intersection between authority, procedure, and the lived experience of a child. Journalists and media personnel leaned forward, cameras focused, microphones poised to capture every word. In hushed tones, they murmured about the unexpected power of Lily's statements. Some scribbled notes furiously, recognizing that this story, simple in its sequence yet monumental in its emotional resonance, could captivate audiences far beyond the town. Social media updates were already being drafted in real time, capturing the awe of witnesses and the unprecedented nature of the testimony. Within moments, the story would be shared widely, the image of a tiny girl articulating fear and truth becoming emblematic of courage and honesty. Whispers flowed through the courtroom like an invisible current. "Did you hear what she said?" one parent asked another, shaking their head. "She's only 3 and she spoke so clearly." "I've never seen anything like this," murmured a neighbor, tears glistening in their eyes. Even the more cynical observers who had anticipated a nervous, incoherent display found themselves reconsidering assumptions about age, perception, and the capacity for truth. There was a collective realization that this small child, untrained and unfiltered, had managed to communicate what adults could not, the genuine emotional weight of the encounter. Some audience members wiped at their eyes, moved by the vulnerability Lily had conveyed. It was not theatrics. There were no exaggerations or performative pauses. Every gesture, every inflection, every slight tremble of her hands conveyed authenticity. The act of witnessing a child recounting fear and resolution with such poise created an atmosphere of empathy and shared understanding. For the first time in the trial, the courtroom felt less like a formal judicial space and more like a vessel for human experience, carrying the resonance of truth in its most honest form. Even the jurors, trained to analyze evidence objectively, were not immune. They shifted in their seats, quietly absorbing every detail. The sequence of events, previously laid out in dry reports and procedural summaries, now had texture, color, and emotional resonance. Lily had provided context that numbers, reports, and adult testimony had failed to capture. Every adult present was reminded of the power of perspective. The fact that a child, untainted by expectations or strategy, could articulate a reality that had eluded even the most meticulous observers. The ripple effect of her words extended beyond the courtroom. Conversations that had been tense and polarized among the community now gained nuance. Social media posts erupted with admiration, highlighting the courage and clarity of a child who had faced fear and spoken truthfully. Commenters discussed the importance of listening to young voices, the responsibilities of authority figures, and the significance of emotional intelligence in understanding events involving children. For many, Lily's testimony was a lesson. Truth is not confined to age, status, or experience. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most profound messages. As the initial shock subsided, the courtroom began to settle into a different rhythm. Lawyers carefully reviewed the transcript of her statements, highlighting points that would later influence procedural evaluations and policy considerations. Officer Daniels and his colleagues were prompted to reconsider training protocols and risk assessments, acknowledging that even highly trained animals could provoke fear in unintended ways. Community leaders, too, recognized the need for dialogue about the intersection of safety, authority, and child welfare. Lily's narrative had sparked a conversation far broader than the immediate case, one that would reverberate throughout the town for weeks to come. The judge, a seasoned professional who had seen decades of courtroom proceedings, allowed a brief pause. He leaned forward, resting his hands on the bench, his gaze softening. "Thank you, Lily," he said quietly. "You've been very brave and told us exactly what happened. That helps everyone understand the situation much better." The weight of his acknowledgement was subtle but profound. In that moment, the courtroom collectively understood that bravery and truth are not measured by age, stature, or sophistication. They are measured by honesty and the courage to speak, even when the audience is intimidating. Lily's parents exhaled slowly, a mixture of relief, pride, and continued concern washing over them. Sarah reached out and held her daughter's small hand, while Thomas gave a supportive nod, silently praising her for facing an experience that would have daunted adults twice her age. The weeks of preparation, gentle coaching, and emotional reinforcement had paid off. Lily had not only survived the intensity of the courtroom, she had triumphed in a way that left an indelible mark on everyone present. The emotional impact was far from fleeting. Observers in the gallery spoke quietly among themselves, replaying her words and gestures in their minds. Parents reflected on the courage of their children, lawyers reconsidered conventional approaches to witness testimony, and the community outside began to grasp the broader implications of her account. Lily's ability to convey fear, sequence, and resolution with unflinching honesty transformed a single event into a shared experience of empathy and understanding. Even as the testimony concluded and proceedings moved forward, the resonance of her words lingered. The courtroom had witnessed something extraordinary. The voice of a child speaking with clarity and courage, shifting perceptions, and reframing the conversation. For the adults present, it was a reminder that truth often arrives unannounced, unfiltered, and in forms we least expect. And for Lily, it was the first step in a journey that would not only shape the outcome of a case, but also inspire a town, challenge authority, and demonstrate the profound power of innocence coupled with honesty. As the courtroom slowly returned to normal procedures, the murmurs and whispers continued to ripple like echoes, testament to the lasting impression of Lily's voice. It was a sound that carried beyond the walls, into homes, classrooms, and community gatherings. People discussed what they had witnessed not just as a legal proceeding but as a human story. Fear confronted, courage expressed, and truth told without embellishment. The smallest voice in the room had spoken the loudest, leaving no one untouched by its resonance. By the end of the day, the story of Lily's testimony had already begun to circulate online and in the local media. News articles emphasized her bravery, commentators highlighted her clarity, and social media users shared snippets of her words, praising her courage and honesty. The narrative spread quickly. A toddler, untrained yet fearless, had given a testimony that revealed not only the events of that day, but also the emotional truths that adults had overlooked. Her account became emblematic of honesty, empathy, and the ability of even the youngest voices to make an extraordinary impact. And so, the courtroom, once a place defined by procedure and formality, became a stage for revelation. Gasps and whispers had marked the beginning of a profound shift in perception. Adults, accustomed to authority and experience, found themselves confronted with the clarity of innocence. Legal arguments, procedural debates, and formal evidence had been complemented, and in some ways overshadowed, by a voice so small yet so resonant that it could not be ignored. The town, the courtroom, and all who bore witness understood. Lily had spoken, and her words would echo far beyond the walls of that room. By the end of the day, it became clear that Lily's testimony was not confined to the courtroom. What began as a localized legal proceeding had blossomed into a ripple effect, reaching far beyond the benches and oak-paneled walls of the courthouse. News crews filed their final reports, broadcasting footage of the tiny witness speaking her truth to audiences far beyond the town. Social media buzzed relentlessly, with clips of her words circulating under headlines praising her bravery and clarity. Viewers nationwide were captivated by the extraordinary image of a 3-year-old commanding the attention of a room full of adults with nothing more than honesty and courage. The family, meanwhile, was overwhelmed by the sheer attention. After the court session, journalists approached carefully, requesting brief interviews. Sarah and Thomas, protective yet understanding of the public's curiosity, responded thoughtfully, emphasizing Lily's courage and the importance of listening to children. "She's our little hero, but more than that, she reminds us that children's voices matter," Sarah said, gently guiding Lily along the hallway. Thomas nodded in agreement, adding, "We never anticipated this, but her honesty is inspiring. It's changing how we think about safety, accountability, and how we teach empathy in our community." The courtroom itself began to process the broader implications of her testimony. Judges and lawyers who were accustomed to evaluating evidence through reports, documents, and expert witnesses were struck by the unique clarity a child's perspective could provide. Lily had highlighted specific details, like the dog's sudden lunge, the exact moment she felt fear, and the steps her mother took to protect her, that were absent in formal police reports. These simple observations, articulated without embellishment, prompted the judge to request a formal review of K-9 patrol procedures and child safety protocols. Within the police department, reactions were mixed but serious. Officer Daniels and other members of the K-9 unit discussed the incident with renewed attention to detail. Training sessions were revisited, with officers reviewing scenarios involving children and emphasizing situational awareness. While the officers knew that unpredictability was part of their job, Lily's testimony underscored that even highly trained dogs could unintentionally induce fear in young children. Department leadership acknowledged the need for preventive measures, including additional safety protocols and community engagement initiatives, to avoid future incidents. Meanwhile, the town of itself became a stage for public discourse. Town meetings, once routine and sparsely attended, filled quickly with concerned parents, neighbors, and community leaders. The conversation now extended beyond the incident to broader questions of accountability, empathy, and communication between law enforcement and the public. Residents debated the balance between safety and authority, recognizing the need to protect children while supporting the necessary functions of the police. Lily's voice, small yet resonant, had inspired reflection and dialogue that might not have occurred otherwise. Community leaders began to consider new initiatives: workshops on child safety around animals, educational programs on how to interact with authority figures, and discussions on empathetic law enforcement practices were proposed. Schools integrated lessons about observing and expressing emotions safely, highlighting the importance of listening to younger voices. Even local media began framing stories around the power of honesty, courage, and perspective, using Lily's account as a touchstone for a broader conversation about accountability, fear, and understanding. In families throughout the town, discussions sparked by Lily's testimony became deeply personal. Parents reflected on how their children had experienced fear, whether in playground disputes, classroom misunderstandings, or encounters with animals. Some parents shared stories in online forums and community groups, inspired to encourage their children to express their emotions openly and without judgment. Lily's experience became a catalyst for families to how they listen to children, valuing clarity, honesty, and emotional truth above assumptions or convenience. The media attention amplified these effects, turning Lily's testimony into a narrative of national interest. Online platforms featured videos of her recounting the incident, emphasizing her bravery, the precision of her memory, and the unfiltered honesty she conveyed. Commentators marveled at how such a young child could illuminate the nuances of a complex situation. Many noted that while adults often overcomplicate narratives with technicalities or procedural language, a child could reveal essential truths that had been overlooked. Lily had inadvertently sparked a conversation about the significance of perspective, courage, and empathy in both legal and social contexts. Legal scholars also began analyzing the case. Articles were published in law journals discussing the weight of a child's testimony, the methodology of eliciting statements from young witnesses, and the implications for procedural justice. Experts praised the careful preparation by Lily's family and legal team, emphasizing how balance, patience, and empathy had allowed a toddler to communicate effectively under highly unusual circumstances. They noted that her testimony could influence future considerations in child witness cases, providing a blueprint for incorporating young perspectives responsibly and meaningfully. Even the officers involved in the incident were affected beyond professional concerns. Many reported moments of reflection, reassessing how authority and training intersect with human perception, especially among vulnerable populations like children. Officer Daniels, who had initially felt defensive about the situation, began acknowledging the value of Lily's perspective. Her words reminded us that even small actions can have big impacts, he said in an internal briefing. It's easy to focus on procedure and forget the human element. We need to remember that every encounter carries consequences, especially with children. For Lily's family, the ripple effect was both awe-inspiring and daunting. They had set out simply to ensure that their daughter's experience was heard and acknowledged, never imagining that it would resonate across the community, state, or even national media. Messages of support, admiration, and gratitude poured in from strangers who had watched clips online, praised the courage of a toddler, and reflected on the importance of listening to the youngest voices. The family, while protective, began to understand that Lily's story had become a symbol, a reminder of the transformative power of honesty and the capacity of a child to influence events with clarity and courage. The ripple effect extended into conversations about childhood trauma and resilience. Psychologists and child development experts highlighted the importance of validating children's experiences, acknowledging fear, and providing safe spaces to express emotions. Lily's account became a case study, illustrating how emotional honesty could coexist with safety, preparation, and support, even in challenging circumstances. Her ability to articulate her feelings, despite her age, challenged assumptions about cognitive and emotional limitations in young children, inspiring research, discussion, and practice across multiple disciplines. The courtroom itself, though returned to procedural normalcy, remained symbolically transformed. Lawyers, judges, and court staff recognized that a child's voice could not be ignored, and that justice encompassed more than rules and technicalities. It also required listening, understanding, and integrating the lived experiences of witnesses, no matter their age. Policy discussions and procedural reviews were already influenced directly by Lily's testimony. Her presence had shifted the focus from abstraction to human reality, creating momentum for change within the legal system itself. Community organizations began to organize events around the lessons inspired by Lily's testimony. Storytelling workshops for children, advocacy for child-safe community spaces, and programs aimed at fostering empathy and communication between law enforcement and families emerged as direct consequences. The town's cultural fabric subtly shifted, emphasizing inclusion, active listening, and respect for even the youngest members of the community. Lily's voice had become a catalyst for change, demonstrating the capacity of truth, courage, and perspective to reshape society in meaningful ways. Even outside, the story gained traction. National media outlets highlighted the uniqueness of the case, a toddler speaking in court about a police-dog encounter, influencing policy discussions, community awareness, and public discourse. Legal analysts discussed implications for child witness credibility, the ethics of courtroom preparation, and the balance between protection and empowerment in young witnesses. Psychologists emphasized the importance of her preparation and emotional support, framing her testimony as a model of how children can communicate effectively without undue stress. Through all of this, Lily remained a child first and foremost. She returned to school, playgrounds, and her everyday routines now imbued with the knowledge that her words had power. She did not fully grasp the broader societal implications of her testimony, but she understood that speaking truthfully had been important. Her parents continued to support and protect her, ensuring that attention did not overwhelm her and that her childhood remained safe and joyful, even as her story inspired adults nationwide. In the weeks following the testimony, the ripple effect continued. Policy discussions in local government considered stricter safety protocols, training revisions, and public awareness campaigns. Conversations in classrooms and homes emphasized empathy, communication, and the importance of listening to children. Media coverage kept the narrative alive, celebrating a story that was as much about courage and honesty as it was about a specific incident. The small voice of a 3-year-old had amplified into a force for reflection, awareness, and action, leaving an enduring mark on everyone who encountered it. By the time the trial concluded, it was clear that Lily's testimony had achieved something extraordinary. It had not only illuminated the details of an incident, but had catalyzed change across legal, social, and cultural spheres. From courtroom procedures to community awareness, from police training to national discourse, her words had created ripples that extended far beyond her small frame. The story of a frightened child who had found her voice had reminded the world of the profound impact even the smallest among us can have when given the opportunity to speak their truth. In the end, Lily's courage became a beacon, illustrating how empathy, preparation, and authenticity could transform fear into understanding. The ripple effect would continue to shape conversations, policies, and perceptions long after the courtroom had emptied. Every gasped reaction, whispered discussion, and thoughtful reflection was a testament to the power of her voice. The courtroom had emptied, leaving an almost tangible echo of Lily's testimony in its polished wooden walls. Spectators, journalists, and even the attorneys lingered in hushed clusters, still processing the extraordinary event they had just witnessed. The ripple effect of a tiny voice had grown far beyond the immediate incident. It had sparked conversations, reflections, and debates that reached into every corner of the community. Yet amid the buzz, Lily's parents were acutely aware that their daughter had now stepped into an unprecedented spotlight, a place that demanded protection, patience, and careful navigation. Sarah and Thomas walked hand in hand with Lily through the courthouse halls, their pace slow, allowing her to absorb the environment without panic. The small girl clutched her rabbit tightly, its soft fabric a comforting anchor amidst the noise of cameras and murmured conversations. "You did so well, Lily," Sarah whispered, brushing strands of hair from her daughter's face. "Everyone could hear your story, and you were so brave." Lily nodded solemnly, understanding only partially the scale of the attention, but sensing the approval radiating from her parents. Courage, they knew, was as much about reassurance as it was about action. Outside the courthouse, the media frenzy was in full force. Reporters jostled for position, microphones and cameras capturing every word from the family as they exited. Social media feeds were already alight with clips of Lily recounting the incident, her small voice carrying weight far beyond her age. Viewers across the country expressed astonishment and admiration. Comments ranged from praising her bravery to discussing the broader implications for child safety, police accountability, and emotional intelligence. Lily's narrative had evolved from a single courtroom account to a catalyst for national conversation. Within, the immediate community was also absorbing the significance of the events. Parents shared stories with their children. Schools integrated discussions about listening and empathy into their curricula, and local organizations began planning workshops on child safety around animals and authority figures. The story of a 3-year-old challenging assumptions through honesty resonated deeply, inspiring initiatives that emphasized preparation, communication, and emotional validation. Lily had unknowingly become a role model, demonstrating that even the youngest voices could spark meaningful change. Legal professionals, meanwhile, convened to analyze the impact of Lily's testimony on the case and on broader jurisprudence. Judges discussed the challenges of incorporating testimony from toddlers into formal proceedings, noting the unprecedented clarity with which she described both events and emotions. Her account highlighted gaps in standard procedures, particularly when children are present in scenarios involving trained animals or other potentially intimidating circumstances. The discussion was nuanced, balancing the reliability of child testimony with the need for procedural safeguards, yet everyone acknowledged the unique insight she had provided. Officer Daniels and his K-9 unit were also reevaluating their training protocols. The incident, once considered routine, had become a case study in the potential consequences of interactions with children. Officers reviewed video footage and police reports with fresh eyes, noting moments where heightened awareness or modified commands could have prevented fear escalation. Training programs were updated to include more child-centric scenarios, emphasizing observation, restraint, and the careful interpretation of a child's reaction to a working dog. Lily's testimony had turned procedural review into a lesson in empathy and precaution. Community leaders recognized the broader cultural significance of the events. Town meetings, which once focused on zoning or municipal projects, now included discussions about child safety, public awareness, and proactive communication with law enforcement. Residents debated policy changes, the value of community engagement, and the importance of listening to young voices. Lily's testimony had reshaped the dialogue, elevating emotional truth alongside technical procedure. The town of, once quiet and routine, had been galvanized into reflection and action, propelled by the honesty of a small child. At home, Lily's parents worked tirelessly to protect her from the intensity of attention. The interviews, social media buzz, and community discussions were filtered carefully, allowing her to experience the pride and validation of her testimony without being overwhelmed by public scrutiny. Playtime remained sacred, with stuffed animals, crayons, and imaginative adventures grounding her in normalcy. Sarah and Thomas understood that the fame of honesty could be fleeting and fragile, and they prioritized emotional well-being over accolades or recognition. The legal system continued to monitor the proceedings closely. Experts in child psychology and witness testimony evaluated the courtroom methods used to elicit Lily's account, noting the balance between preparation and freedom that allowed her to articulate truthfully. Reports highlighted the importance of calm reassurance, the avoidance of leading questions, and the gentle encouragement of expressive language. The findings suggested that, with careful support, even very young children could provide testimony that was both credible and illuminating, potentially influencing future cases and courtroom protocols nationwide. Meanwhile, the broader public discourse flourished. Newspapers, blogs, and televised segments featured Lily's story as an example of the power of perspective and emotional honesty. Commentators discussed how society often underestimates children's capacity for communication, reflection, and truth-telling. Parents and educators debated methods to encourage honesty, resilience, and self-expression, using Lily's experience as both inspiration and cautionary tale. The dialogue extended to law enforcement agencies across the country, prompting conversations about training and community engagement. As the trial progressed, the courtroom itself evolved in tone and expectation. Lawyers, judges, and officers approached proceedings with heightened sensitivity, fully aware of the enduring presence of Lily's testimony. The focus shifted subtly from adversarial argumentation to understanding, clarity, and procedural adjustment. Her narrative had created a lens through which adults now viewed the entire case, a lens grounded in honesty, vulnerability, and the human experience. No report, no protocol, no adult perspective could replace the raw clarity of a child's words. Socially, Lily became a symbol of courage for the children in her community. Friends and classmates discussed her bravery with awe, inspired to express their own feelings and observations with newfound confidence. Playgrounds, classrooms, and family gatherings echoed with conversations about fear, bravery, and honesty. Lily's parents facilitated discussions, teaching their daughter the value of speaking truth while emphasizing the importance of safety, trust, and discretion. In doing so, they nurtured a sense of agency in Lily that balanced empowerment with protection. The emotional impact of her testimony extended to the adults who had witnessed it. Members of the jury reflected on their deliberations with heightened sensitivity, aware that the child's perspective had illuminated dimensions of the incident that procedural analysis alone could not capture. Officers who had previously been defensive now expressed thoughtful reflection, acknowledging the need for empathy, observation, and adaptation in all public encounters. Even legal analysts, often detached from human experience, commented on the profound effect of a toddler's clarity on the interpretation of events. Nationally, the story continued to gain traction. Articles emphasized not just the incident itself, but the broader lessons regarding child witnesses, police interactions, and the importance of listening. Advocacy groups highlighted the case as a model for child empowerment and procedural fairness. Social media amplified the narrative, reaching audiences who marveled at the notion that a small voice could inspire systemic reflection and public discourse. Lily's account became a reference point in discussions about courage, honesty, and the transformative power of perspective. Even months after the incident, the ripple effect persisted. The family remained vigilant, balancing exposure with protection, while the community continued to integrate lessons learned from the case. Police departments instituted modified training procedures, schools implemented empathy-based programs, and local forums prioritized inclusive discussions about children's perspectives. The courtroom, too, retained the memory of Lily's testimony, using it as a benchmark for handling sensitive cases and illustrating how clarity and truth can emerge from the most unexpected sources. For Lily, life gradually returned to normal, yet the experience had left a subtle but lasting impression. She approached her surroundings with heightened awareness, occasionally recounting details of her testimony in private moments with her parents. Playtime, family activities, and school continued, but with an unspoken sense of pride and accomplishment. Her parents reinforced the importance of balance, ensuring that their daughter experienced her childhood fully while understanding the significance of the courage she had demonstrated. Ultimately, Lily's story, the profound consequences that can arise from speaking truth, no matter one's age. The courtroom testimony, initially a legal formality, became a catalyst for change across multiple dimensions: procedural refinement, community engagement, emotional awareness, and societal reflection. Her voice, small but unwavering, had reverberated far beyond the walls of the courthouse, reminding all who witnessed it of the power of honesty, the impact of empathy, and the necessity of listening, truly listening, to every perspective, regardless of age. In retrospect, the trial would be remembered not only for the incident itself, but for the extraordinary presence of a 3-year-old girl who refused to be silenced. Her courage inspired change, provoked reflection, and reshaped perceptions of authority, childhood, and the nature of truth. Lily's voice became a symbol, a testament to the extraordinary potential that exists when honesty, bravery, and preparation converge in the most unexpected form. The ripple effect, though sparked by fear and vulnerability, had transformed into a wave of awareness, understanding, and hope that would continue to shape and beyond for years to come. The courthouse was unusually quiet as the trial reached its final day. The anticipation that had built up over weeks now felt almost tangible, a thick tension that hung in the air like mist. Lawyers prepared their closing arguments, jurors exchanged subtle glances, and the judge reviewed notes meticulously. Yet beneath the procedural precision, a shared awareness lingered. The testimony of a 3-year-old girl had transformed what would have been a routine case into something extraordinary. Lily's voice, small yet commanding, had already changed perceptions, reshaped dialogue, and influenced both policy and public awareness. Lily, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly under her arm, sat between her parents in the courtroom gallery. Sarah brushed her daughter's hair back gently, whispering encouragement. "You've been so brave, Lily. No matter what happens today, we're proud of you." Thomas nodded, his hand resting over hers in quiet solidarity. Lily's wide eyes reflected a mixture of curiosity, fatigue, and an emerging understanding that her words had mattered far more than she could fully comprehend. Though young, she sensed the weight of the room's attention, and the significance of her courage had been reinforced countless times over the preceding weeks. The jury filed in, taking their seats with expressions a careful blend of focus and reflection. They had listened to testimonies, analyzed evidence, and reviewed procedural documentation, but it was Lily's account that had left an indelible impression. Her narrative, simple, honest, and precise, had reframed the incident, highlighting emotional realities that no report or adult witness could fully capture. Each juror had carried her words in their minds, replaying the fear, clarity, and resilience she had conveyed. Now, they faced the responsibility of weighing the evidence while acknowledging the profound influence of a child's truth. The judge called the courtroom to order and allowed the attorneys to present their closing statements. The prosecutor emphasized the clarity and credibility of Lily's testimony, highlighting how her unfiltered account had illuminated critical details. "This case isn't just about procedure," Karen Mitchell said, her voice steady but impassioned. "It's about understanding the human impact of every action, every command, and every interaction." A 3-year-old girl has reminded us of the importance of empathy, responsibility, and attentiveness. Her words are clear, her courage undeniable, and her story demands recognition. The defense attorney, Thomas, spoke next, maintaining his professional composure. "We do not dispute the accuracy of the child's account," he said carefully. "However, the intent and training of law enforcement, the unpredictability of animals, and the complexities of situational dynamics must also be considered. This is not a story of negligence, but a reminder that unforeseen circumstances can affect even the most carefully trained officers." His words were measured, acknowledging the child's perspective while defending procedural integrity. The jurors retreated to deliberate, the atmosphere heavy with the weight of responsibility. Outside, the media and community waited anxiously, fully aware that the courtroom held the culmination of a story that had captured local and even national attention. In the hallways, murmurs flowed like a quiet river, punctuated by occasional gasps as reporters recounted details of Lily's testimony. The anticipation was electric. The ripple effect she had created now seemed poised to influence not just a verdict, but the broader understanding of accountability, courage, and human experience. Inside the jury room, discussion was intense yet respectful. Jurors revisited every detail of the trial, carefully weighing adult testimonies alongside Lily's account. They recognized the importance of her narrative in reconstructing the incident, particularly the sequence of events, the emotional impact, and the subtle but critical details she had observed. Her observations about the dog's sudden movements, her fear, and the interventions of her parents were analyzed alongside procedural evidence. Each juror was acutely aware that this case had been transformed by a voice they had initially underestimated, the voice of a 3-year-old child. Hours passed as deliberation continued. Jurors revisited their notes, debated interpretations, and sought consensus. Some were deeply moved by Lily's courage, reflecting on how her honesty had illuminated the incident in ways no report or adult testimony could. Others focused on the balance of responsibility, considering procedural standards, training practices, and the unpredictable nature of animal behavior. Yet throughout the discussion, one truth remained undeniable. Lily's testimony had reshaped the framework through which they assessed the case. It had added a human dimension that no amount of documentation could replicate. Finally, the jury returned to the courtroom, their expressions sober but resolute. The judge allowed them to deliver the verdict, and a hush fell over the room. Every eye, lawyers, officers, spectators, and the media, fixed on the jury foreperson as they stood to speak. "We, the jury," the foreperson began, voice steady yet tinged with emotion, "find that while the officers acted within training guidelines, there was a lapse in situational awareness that contributed to the fear experienced by the child. We recommend procedural revisions, additional training for interactions with children, and community engagement initiatives to prevent similar incidents in the future." A collective exhale swept through the courtroom. The verdict acknowledged the officers' professional intent while validating Lily's experience and highlighting areas for improvement. It was a nuanced outcome, a rare recognition of a child's perspective in shaping both legal and community standards. The courtroom seemed to pause, absorbing the significance. Accountability and understanding could coexist, and a small voice had made that possible. Sarah and Thomas hugged Lily tightly, their eyes moist with pride and relief. "You did it, sweetheart," Sarah whispered. "Everyone listened to you." Lily's small nod conveyed comprehension, satisfaction, and quiet triumph. Outside the courthouse, the reaction was immediate and widespread. News outlets broadcasted the verdict, emphasizing the unprecedented nature of a toddler influencing a legal and procedural outcome. Social media erupted with discussions about child testimony, accountability, and the importance of empathy in public service. Advocacy groups praised the decision, citing it as a model for balancing professional responsibility with human impact. Local residents celebrated the recognition of Lily's experience, while national audiences marveled at the courage of a small child, whose words had reverberated far beyond her immediate environment. Within the police department, the verdict prompted a swift response. Officers implemented revised training procedures that incorporated child-centric scenarios, emphasizing observation, communication, and situational awareness. Workshops were conducted on empathetic engagement, and protocols were updated to reduce potential fear-inducing situations. Officer Daniels and his colleagues acknowledged the lessons learned, reflecting on how even highly trained professionals could be reminded by the smallest witnesses that human experience must always remain central. Lily's testimony had reshaped their approach to service, awareness, and responsibility. Schools and community organizations also embraced the implications of the trial. Programs focusing on child safety, emotional literacy, and communication skills were expanded. Teachers incorporated discussions about listening to children, validating their experiences, and understanding fear and courage in everyday situations. Community workshops engaged parents in methods to support their children in expressing emotions safely and confidently. The ripple effect of Lily's testimony had become embedded in the social fabric, influencing policy, education, and everyday interactions. Over the following months, Lily's story remained a touchstone in local and national conversations. Articles, podcasts, and educational segments analyzed the extraordinary nature of her testimony, emphasizing the lessons of courage, honesty, and empathy. Legal professionals referenced the case in discussions about child witnesses, while psychologists and educators highlighted her clarity and resilience as exemplary. The story transcended the immediate incident, becoming a case study in how authenticity and preparation can empower even the youngest voices. For Lily, life gradually returned to normal routines, preschool and bedtime stories, but with a subtle sense of pride and understanding. She continued to clutch her stuffed rabbit, unaware of the full scale of her impact, yet fully conscious that her words had mattered. Her parents remained vigilant, balancing exposure with protection, ensuring that the attention she had received did not overwhelm her childhood. Playtime, exploration, and imagination were preserved as sacred spaces, grounding her in the innocence that had made her testimony both compelling and credible. The community have also carried forward the lessons of the trial. Town policies were updated, educational programs integrated new modules on empathy and communication, and local law enforcement adopted child-focused engagement strategies. Discussions about safety, responsibility, and awareness became more nuanced, guided by the understanding that small voices can illuminate truths often overlooked by adults. Lily's experience had permanently shifted the town's approach to children, community interaction, and the consideration of human impact in professional settings. Years later, the story of Lily's testimony remained a defining moment in history. It was recounted in schools, legal seminars, and community events as an example of courage, honesty, and the transformative power of perspective. The town took pride in having nurtured a moment that transcended age, reminding everyone that truth, empathy, and bravery are not measured by size or experience, but by the willingness to speak openly and honestly. Lily's legacy endured, not as a fleeting media story, but as a lasting lesson in the power of listening, understanding, and valuing the perspectives of all members of society, no matter how young. In the end, the trial became more than a legal proceeding. It became a testament to the extraordinary impact of a single voice. Lily, small yet resolute, had reminded an entire town, its legal system, and countless individuals beyond that courage and honesty can shape reality. Her story inspired change, fostered understanding, and left a legacy that extended far beyond the courtroom walls. The ripple effect she created would continue for generations, a symbol of bravery, integrity, and the profound influence of speaking one's truth. And in quiet moments at home, when Lily hugged her rabbit and recounted the story to her parents, there was a simple truth: she had been heard, she had been valued, she had made a difference. And sometimes that was all that mattered.